You think like I could just, and everything is so, it's not clear like that.
Why isn't it?
I don't know.
In 2009, the Mount Pleasant neighborhood of Cleveland, Ohio, stood as a place overshadowed by fear and secrets, where the tragedy that happened was so horrific that no one wanted to talk about.
What happened in this house behind me is simply a nightmare, and there are a lot of deeply disturbing questions for authorities here.
At 12205 Imperial Avenue, there's now an empty lot. But it wasn't always that way. It was the site of Anthony Soul's house of horror and mystery. When police entered his home, what they discovered inside was literally shocking.
6 bodies are very, very significant. They are like concrete, like glue. They're stuck. They're not going nowhere for the rest of your life.
Anthony Soul was born in 1959 and grew up on Page Avenue in East Cleveland. He lived with his cousins and nephews in a large household. Unfortunately, they were all subjected to harsh abuse. His grandmother would beat the children until they bled, often forcing the others to watch. Physical assaults among the children were also a frequent torment in the house. At a young age, Anthony decided to escape this environment by joining the Marine Corps. He served for 7 years, stationed in North Carolina, California, and Okinawa, Japan. The strict and abusive background seemed to help him adapt to military life, where he excelled and earned several recognitions. However, after leaving the service in the mid-80s and returning to Cleveland, his life began to deteriorate as he often struggled with addiction. In 1989, things started to get strange when a pregnant woman ended up at Anthony's house. He restrained, gagged, and sexually assaulted her. After a while, he pleaded guilty to the charges and was sentenced to 5 to 15 years in prison, during which he was evaluated by psychologists multiple times. During his time in prison, he repeatedly applied for parole but was denied each time. He wasn't released until he had served his full sentence, which ended in 2005. That same year, he moved into the house at 12205 Imperial Avenue. Since he was classified in the lowest tier of sex offenders, he didn't have to knock on doors and could slip more easily into the wider community. By all accounts, Anthony was a very charming and likable guy on the outside, which is one of the worst and most unpredictable traits that predators possess. Shortly after moving in, the neighbors living directly across the street began complaining to the police about a foul smell, described as either gas or something dead. Anthony worked at a rubber factory for a while and got along well, until police complaints surfaced and several women began disappearing in East Cleveland. When partying with Anthony, it was predictable that he might cook up some drugs with a 6-pack of beer and then try to initiate sex, whether the women wanted it or not. In early December 2008, a woman came across police in the neighborhood. She reported that he had beaten her, dragged her into his house, and tried to assault her. The police quickly went to the house and arrested Anthony. However, both he and the woman gave conflicting accounts, and each had scratches and marks. Consequently, they were both taken into custody, but the police later released them due to lack of evidence. Anthony had actually been in a relationship with a woman named Lori, which led him into a crack addiction. His obsession with Lori caused him to lose his job, but she wanted to escape drugs, so she left. Anthony, on the other hand, didn't feel the same way. Although he was content, Lori's leaving acted as a catalyst for him. Just a month after she left, a woman named Crystal Dozier vanished. Crystal, a 35-year-old mother of 7, was passionate about helping around the house and learning to cook. She enjoyed playing the role of an adult. However, drugs had already begun to take over her life, leaving her situation increasingly chaotic. Her ongoing struggle with addiction made her vulnerable, a trait that Anthony Soul preyed upon. After she went to his house, there was no word from her for 2.5 years. Detectives were unable to gather the information they needed, as Anthony selected his victims from a group of people who would be hesitant to step forward as witnesses. When he got drunk, he would occasionally go out looking for prostitutes, like Tizhana Culver, who went missing in June 2008. For the residents of Mount Pleasant, all they knew at the time was that something bad was coming from somewhere in the neighborhood. Right next to the house at 12205 was a small company called Ray's Sausage, a business that provided and distributed meat products. A foul odor always lingered in the area that neighbors reported to the health department, which inspectors would come out and repeatedly attribute the smell to Sausage Workplace. In fact, the family who owned the company went as far as overhauling their entire sewer system, thinking somehow the odor was their fault. After a few months, LaShonda Long, 25 years old and a mother of 3, disappeared. She was the youngest and had struggled with crack addiction, following the patterns set by her alcoholic father. It was only a matter of time before she fell into the hands of Anthony Sowell, unable to defend herself due to a life filled with drugs and bad choices. His approach was quite deceptive. He would find and lure women with drugs, appearing very friendly and caring. The next woman drawn into the grim scene was 33-year-old Tanya Carmichael, who disappeared in November 2008. Once a protective mother who chased away drug dealers to keep her children safe, she had fallen into the same addiction herself. Her path crossed with Anthony's since they both grew up on Page Avenue. Though they may have known each other superficially, Tanya's connection to Anthony ultimately led her to addiction, eventually into the grasp of a serial killer. Her family reported her missing, but because of her known drug addiction, the police told them to just wait. As the mystery in the neighborhood persisted, no one suspected anything unusual about Anthony's house. Meanwhile, Michelle Mason was finally getting her life back on track after years of struggling with heroin and crack addiction. But she crossed paths with Anthony Sowell after leaving her family's house. On September 22, 2009, Anthony invited another woman back to his house, this time a woman named Vanessa Gay. As she spent time with Anthony, they drank, smoked, and shot the breeze until she decided to leave. At that point, he grabbed her, started punching, and strangled her until she passed out. She eventually woke up completely naked, bleeding, and gagging from the stench. Surprisingly, he allowed her to go, making a grave mistake that would ultimately expose his dark secrets as a serial killer.
Did you notice anything about the room on the left?
It looked like it was a body and it had no hand on it. He said, you gonna tell. He wasn't talking to me. He was just talking. You gonna tell. I know you gonna tell. You know, at first he wasn't talking to me because you gonna tell. I know you gonna tell.
A month later, he brought another woman, Shawn Morris. Although the smell was obvious, she didn't seem to mind and simply hung out with him. That night, they had a few drinks and used some drugs together, but nothing sexual. The next morning, as she was leaving, she realized she had left her ID upstairs. As she was walking up the stairs, Anthony suddenly began strangling her and dragged her into his bedroom. She fought back, and the two of them fell, breaking and damaging the drywall. Realizing her only escape might be through the upper-story bedroom window, she jumped and made her getaway, completely naked. This time, neighbors witnessed the incident from the second-floor window and immediately contacted the police to report what they had seen. In a surprising twist, it was Anthony himself who called 911 first, claiming that her fall had been an accident. They quickly became aware of the women's repeated calls to the police, but the authorities took their time responding. They didn't view Anthony as a significant threat, a surprising oversight, given how many women had disappeared from the town. On October 29, 2009, police finally executed a search warrant on his house. When they arrived at 12205, the elusive serial killer wasn't there. As police entered the house, they were immediately hit by the stench and discovered 2 bodies buried in shallow graves in the basement. A day later, the rest of the house was searched. 2 more bodies were found buried in the garden, 3 wrapped in the attic, 2 decomposing in the crawl space, and the skull of another in a bucket.
Police believe that they were murdered by this man, Anthony Sowell, a convicted rapist who had been living in the house. 5 of the bodies have been identified as women. Police say they were strangled.
I didn't feel safe. There's something telling me, don't go in this house.
In total, 11 bodies were uncovered at 12205, all women who had gone missing since 2007. On October 31st, police arrested Anthony Sowell while he was anonymously walking down the street about a mile from his house. He was thoroughly interviewed by the police, but it led nowhere as he repeatedly denied any wrongdoing.
You can't make nothing happen that I'm trying my best, man.
I know what you're saying, but
Okay, see, every time I get you just You think like I could just, and everything is so, it's not clear like that.
Why isn't it?
I don't know.
It's the most significant thing that has ever happened to you in your life. In your 50 years of living, 6 dead bodies are very, very significant. They are like concrete, like glue. They're stuck. They're not going nowhere for the rest of your life. You know, they're gonna be there forever.
It's hard for us to believe you don't know what happened.
I don't care what you believe. I don't care what you believe. I came up here
so
and
you
try to help y'all.
No, you're not. But you're not.
Okay, but because I can't tell you what you exactly what you want to hear. Okay, well,
how do you think you can help us then?
To help you try to identify these people. That's what I'm trying to do. That's what you say you want. So forget it.
You see you doing something with your hands, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay, what you doing with your hands? You having a good time. Party.
I think I choked somebody. That's all I know. That's all I feel. Yes.
You feel that you choked somebody,
right.
But you don't know how many people you choked. Well, I'll tell you what. If the dream told you to choke her, and you choked her, that damn dream is over.
Anthony was initially charged with 5 counts of aggravated murder, which was later increased to 11 counts.
We're here to announce an 85-count indictment against Anthony Soule, who was responsible for Cleveland's heinous crimes. A Cuyahoga County grand jury has returned an indictment against this monster for brutalizing 3 women, 2 who've been raped, and murdering 11 more.
At his trial, he appeared to be a completely different person, very nice and polite, which of course made him the most dangerous type of serial killer. Meanwhile, it was a sobering moment for the Cleveland community to realize that 11 women had gone missing without anyone making the connection, that they had all disappeared in the same place and been killed by the same man. Anthony was convicted on all counts, and on August 12, 2011, he was sentenced to death. He remained on death row until his death in prison from a terminal illness in February 2021 at the age of 61. For a time, the horrific house in Cleveland stood as a haunting reminder of the crimes. However, in 2010, authorities decided to tear down 12205. Smash that subscribe and see you on the next one.